Yeah, thanks, Brian. First and foremost, I just want to say, Brian referenced sending me money, and I think everybody heard that several times throughout the presentation. So I'm gonna take you up on that after we're done here,
That sounds great.
Brian. All right. Like you're controlling, right? There you go. All right, so first and foremost, what I wanted to cover is the SolarWinds Orion hack. Now, this has pretty much dominated the headlines here in the last few months, and honestly, with good reason. The SolarWinds attack was initially discovered in December 2020. And it's important because SolarWinds is actually an IT management software. So what that means is it has access to a little bit of everything in your environment. It's also the type of software that, if your antivirus or your SIM or anything like that actually threw up a bunch of alerts, you would say, oh, well, whitelist this and don't worry about it. So of course, because of that nature of it, it did go on for several months, if not even longer. We've seen multiple adversaries that are part of that. Now, SolarWinds is what's known as a supply chain attack. And so what that means is that whoever's attacking SolarWinds isn't necessarily going after SolarWinds as the end game. What they're trying to do is they're going after SolarWinds to get to SolarWinds customers. And so you may say, well, who would actually be a customer of this company that gets hacked like this? Well, 400 of the Fortune 500 companies are all SolarWinds customers. You'll see a few of the names there you might recognize, from Cisco to Intel to NVIDIA to Microsoft. Microsoft even lost some source code out of the entire thing, or had some unauthorized access to source code. Now, it didn't just stop at the private sector. Also, the US government, the Department of Treasury, Commerce, State, the list goes on as far as who was actually affected in the government as well. Next slide, Brian. So, so first and foremost, this frog's kind of my spirit animal when it comes to cybersecurity. But really what it comes down to is, a lot of people say, okay, these companies, the government, they are spending millions, if not billions of dollars on cybersecurity. What chance does anybody else have? Well, really, don't throw in the towel. There are some simple things that we can do. This was a very, very sophisticated attack as far as SolarWinds goes. So, that's not the norm. The SolarWinds attack, we're going to be talking about probably for the rest of my career, honestly. It's that big of a deal. So, don't just think of it as, this is the norm, because it is definitely not. Recognize context. Not everybody is a Fortune 500 company. Not everybody is the US government. So just realize that, not everyone is going to get attacked and targeted quite in the same nature that they were. And then last but not least, avoid the red herrings. Now, what I mean by that is, don't look at this attack and all of a sudden start looking at everything as suspect as far as supply chain goes. I'm not saying that supply chain is not important. It absolutely is. But a lot of people are now focusing on supply chain attacks and looking into every single vendor that they work with. Meanwhile, over here they have systems that are unpatched. They have a MRI machine that's running XP. They're not doing vulnerability management. So, just don't get too enthralled in the supply chain attack. Like I said, very important, but it is definitely up the scale, I guess, as far as attackers and how deep you'll get targeted by a supply chain attack like it. Next slide, Brian. All right, so what are some things that we should be looking at? Well, number one, obviously ransomware. Ransomware has been with us for a while. Ransomware is going to be with us for a very, very long time. I would actually call it public enemy number one. It's kind of the worst thing and the best thing to ever happen to cybersecurity, because it's devilishly difficult to keep out, but at the same time, you have to do something about it. Everybody knows someone that was affected by ransomware at some point, and so definitely a big deal. Now, these all of the highlights or the headlines from this particular page are actually all in the last week. So just something to think about, that ransomware really is affecting everybody and anybody at this point. So definitely keep it at the top of the mind as you go through some of the things. And like I said, don't focus on the red herrings, the supply chain attacks and things like that. Make sure that you're actually protecting against real world events, or what's most likely anyway. Next slide, Brian. So how big is ransomware, or how important is it to secure against? Look no further than CISA and the FBI actually released a joint alert October of last year, stating that ransomware is specifically targeting healthcare and the public sectors. Now, I have a couple of links down there at the bottom. The one for the CISA.gov actually gives a great overview of what they're seeing, including IOCs, indicators of compromise for attacks, whether that's domain names, IP addresses, you name it. Now, the second link that I have actually on that page is from the abuse.ch website. It's a way that is used to track command and control information, so IP addresses and things like that are tied to different ransomware gangs and strains. And so, as you're going through that CISA.gov, if you're reading through that particular alert, you'll notice that some of the IPs, maybe your systems are not blocking, or that you're not, doing anything with them. Well, it's because those IP addresses are no longer used for C2, for command and control. So, definitely take a look at that abuse.ch website instead. It's far more up to date. They update it literally every few minutes. So you can definitely see if any of your systems are communicating with known bad IP addresses and things of that nature. Next slide, Brian. Now, the kicker really in all of these attacks and all of these attackers is, it used to be a few years ago that you could really pigeonhole things and say, this is, Russia, this is nation state, this is organized crime. We're finding a lot of those attacks are blurring at this point. It's really hard to attribute, who's doing what. They're using a lot of the same techniques. Obviously, there's still indicators as far as who kind of prefers what techniques, but we're definitely seeing a lot of similarities between them. Now, targeted or target of opportunity, and so I was actually just talking to Brian last week about a multinational ransomware incident that I was fortunate to be a part of, and originally, billion-dollar company, several continents, appeared to be, more or less a targeted attack. And long story short, after a few hours of investigation, they were ransomware, and we thought, well, somebody's going after a big company here. After a few hours of investigation, I actually found out that they had a firewall at one of their locations that still had a vulnerability from 2018. And it was leaking usernames and passwords. Well, if you're not using two-factor, you're not doing really the basics, the cyber hygiene, someone was then able to go into that environment and ransomware it. I mean, in a matter of hours, they'd be able to do that. I'm sure the attackers kind of stuck around for a bit just to kind of figure out the lay of the land, but it really was that easy. So, going back to that target or target of opportunity, obviously, if you have a firewall with a 2018 vulnerability, consider yourself a target of opportunity. instead. So really, where is the weak link? If you're not doing vulnerability management, that's going to be a good chance to be your weak link. We're going to talk about it here in a little bit, but if you're not doing training for employees, definitely those are going to be weak links. And so keep in mind that some of these attacks, ransomware, crypto miners, botnets, data exfiltration, a few years ago, once again, ransomware, it infected your machine, and within a few seconds, it popped up on the screen and said, hey, you need to pay me in Bitcoin, otherwise, you're not going to get your data back. Well, now attackers are, going in, seeing if there's anything that they can get out of the environment. They're possibly doing data exfiltration, most likely they are, and then turning around and doing ransomware at a later date and time to the entire environment. So, definitely the attackers are starting to use these different components and kind of mix and match. And if they feel like, this company may not necessarily be worthwhile to ransomware, well, maybe they turn over, a crypto miner or something like that that's sitting there mining, not necessarily Bitcoin, but Monero or one of the other cryptocurrencies on your behalf, and just utilizing, your system resources and power. Or, once again, the botnets where they're able to do DDoS attacks against somebody else. Now, going back with our healthcare theme and my experience with healthcare, Brian kind of mentioned that the numbers are all over the place as far as, how valuable is healthcare data. And obviously it changes just like anything, but, 7 to 10 times is kind of the general statement that I seen, and even in my past research actually saw. And I mean, really, it makes sense to highlight, kind of what Brian was saying before. If somebody gets a healthcare record, they now have everything they need to do, some sort of pharmaceutical fraud, prescription fraud, insurance fraud. I mean, all these different aspects that you can now do just because you have all of that information. Financial, if I say buy a credit card or something like that on the dark web, I mean, there's a chance that I don't even get to use it one time before the credit card company's blocking it. I mean, they have become exceptionally good at, stopping fraud attempts. I mean, everybody here on this webcast has probably had that at some point in time. So, I mean, they are very, very good. But, what's the end goal, or what's the end game for them? I mean, if something happens on your credit card, they send you a new credit card, you go on with life. It maybe makes for a bad 15 minutes or maybe a few hours of your life, versus, somebody gets your medical information. I mean, you can really, really destroy someone's life in pretty short order with that type of info.